Another example, I think, is Starlink. To me, the benefits for, and I'm sure this would be mostly poor black rural South Africans who would actually benefit from Starlink, not to mention the farming community that are often isolated and could benefit from high-speed internet. The fact that the government refuses to allow Starlink to operate in this country because it doesn't meet the BE requirements, I think really highlights just how perverse this policy is. This is not about improving opportunities for black people. This is about enriching a narrow elite. So I think that's a very illustrative example.
What's happened to Starlink is striking because it's such a prominent company, international, and Mr. Musk has his flair and tweets about it. But just multiply that by 1 million times, and that is the effect that is actually happening every day in South Africa through companies of much smaller scale with much less flashy products, but also of value-adding capacity, which are now prohibited, restricted. So I'm afraid that, it's indicative what's happened to Mr. Musk. And interestingly, there seems to be some possibility that he may be offered, he and others like him may be offered what is called equity equivalence. That basically means instead of giving off ownership, you can pay for entry into the country in another way. You can just pay in cash or in some alternative kind of expense. I don't like that very much. I think that has actually been the case for many international companies, many prominent brands of automakers, of soft drinks and so on have made equity equivalent deals with the government, with Ibrahim Patel, with trade and industry over the last 10 years.
Their shareholder agreements prohibit them from ceding equity to local partners,
precisely.
For example. Yeah,
precisely. And so equity equivalence isn't a new thing. It's actually also not a great alternative. I would really like it if some of these international companies would push back also against equity equivalence, because it's still an entry tax. And now with these transformation funds being set up all around, even Mr. John Steenhuisen has signed off on some things explicitly called transformation funds. He didn't, perfect that he wasn't the first to establish them, but he continued his predecessor's policies. So even within this, the government, there's lots of staying power for these transformation funds. Minister Parks Tower of Trade and Industry now wants to put a near 100 billion rand fund there. We have some localization funds, and I'm just seeing a scenario here in which these equity equivalent schemes are being directed to fund these slush funds, and that creates a whole new separate patronage network that will take another 10, 20 years to disentangle. So these equity equivalent alternatives are a problem. I hope they don't stay.
Yeah, and I think underpinning something like an equivalence scheme is an assumption that somehow the world, investors, owes us something for operating here. But we should be welcoming that investment as a net benefit to ourselves.
Yeah, but again, some of it is economic misunderstanding. It's the idea that if you let Starlink provide satellite communication in the country, that's going to be a problem. Why would they have people are going to be better off with it regardless, and now they have to pay that entry tax. So it's the misunderstanding, but then also the, once there's this little small, what's it called, a trechter, anyways, where a lot of like a choke point. So BE and these entry requirements, they form a choke point, and wherever there's this choke point, people can make money off the side.
And I think your point about the hundreds, if not thousands, of other companies that are either operating at a low capacity or are not choosing to operate in South Africa at all because of these costs. I think there is a massive opportunity cost that you just don't see. It's invisible.
Yeah, choosing not to expand, choosing not to employ. If you have 49 employees today, you'd be very hesitant to employ the 50th employee. Or even if you're at 45, you're going to think twice about getting near that 50 mark, because government's going to bring that 50 mark employment equity threshold down. In Namibia, the employment equity threshold is now 10. So this is in so many ways so damaging.
But yeah, I think that's a good example. When you concede the point, when you concede the principle, then the government can very easily change those thresholds.
Right.
And when you resist, well, they say, well, you already accept 50, why not accept 40 or even 10?
Yes.
But you mentioned earlier some of the the strands of thinking. The kind of racial nationalism, I think, is the one impulse within the government, and the ANC's ideology, and we're having a separate conversation with Dr. Anthea Jeffrey about the National Democratic Revolution, this socialist paradigm that really underpins ANC policy. But then there's also socialism. Yeah, so a racial nationalist socialism, I think, is probably the best descriptor here. So, I mean, is it the case that the president and his colleagues misunderstand economics, or do they have an alternative view of economics, which is anathema to free markets and private enterprise and individual liberty?
Even in his remarks last week or week or two ago, President Ramaphosa used the term the means of production, and used several typically socialist or Marxist economic thinking phrases. So I think there's a serious conviction of that theory of economics, insofar as you can call it a theory. It has its problems. So you can sincerely be wrong. And I think, unfortunately, some of what we see from the ANC is sincerely just wrong economics. Much of it isn't. This does not explain it, but much of it is just sincerely wrong. And all through, I mean, especially in the 90s and past 20 years, today we can be very explicitly against BEE. We can say it's harmful. Professor Gumede says it's harmful. Some very successful black business people have said that it is harmful. But 20 years ago, this wasn't easy to say. Even 10 years ago, it was difficult to have these conversations. And I'm afraid that part of why people and business people in South Africa have tolerated BEE and employment equity for so long is that they're good at business, but being good at business doesn't mean you have an elaborate understanding of economic theory and you think about all the concatenating effects on the capital structure and so on. So I think it's only now emerging just how wrong the whole theory of support for BEE was. And that's a good thing, because it means that the opposition can also be strengthened, knowing that we have a correct understanding of economics, and that this is not about an ideological preference, it's about an analytical correctness or not.